Show me your invitation." The security guard's voice carried that familiar tone of authority mixed with suspicion, the kind that makes you feel guilty before you've even done anything wrong. The elderly man standing before the university gates shifted uncomfortably, his weathered hands fumbling through the pockets of his simple gray suit jacket. He'd dressed carefully that morning, choosing his best clothes for what he knew would be one of the most important days of his life. But standing here now, facing the skeptical stare of a guard young enough to be his grandson, he suddenly felt every one of his 78 years. The security officer tapped his clipboard impatiently, his eyes scanning the growing crowd of families and graduates flowing through the entrance behind them. To him, this confused old man was just another problem to solve, another disruption to manage on what was already shaping up to be a hectic day. He had no idea that the man fumbling through his pockets had once commanded respect from generals and presidents alike. Had no idea that buildings on this very campus bore his name, or that hundreds of students had received educations because of his generosity. All he saw was an elderly Hispanic man, without proper credentials, trying to gain entry to an exclusive event where he clearly didn't belong. Welcome to the Veteran Voices. Before we continue with this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you think stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being part of this journey. The University of Texas at Austin was alive with the energy that only comes with graduation day. Families arrived in their finest clothes, carrying flowers and cameras, their faces bright with the kind of pride that spans generations. Students walked across campus in their caps and gowns, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice finally within reach. The main entrance to the campus was flanked by towering limestone buildings that had witnessed decades of commencements, their ivy-covered walls holding the echoes of countless dreams realized and futures launched. Today, like every graduation day, these buildings stood as silent sentinels to the transformative power of education. Eduardo Martinez had been walking these same paths for over an hour, trying to find the right entrance for the ceremony. At 78, his steps weren't as sure as they once were, and the sprawling campus seemed larger and more confusing than he remembered from his previous visits. He'd driven down from San Antonio that morning, leaving before dawn to ensure he wouldn't be late for his granddaughter's graduation. Jennifer was the first person in their family to earn a master's degree, and Eduardo wouldn't have missed this moment for anything in the world. The drive had been longer than he'd anticipated, with his old pickup truck struggling up the hills outside Austin and his aging eyes requiring frequent stops to rest. But he'd made it, parking in a visitor lot several blocks from campus and walking the rest of the way with the determination of a man who'd never missed an important family milestone. Eduardo had served 32 years in the Army, rising from a young private who barely spoke English to a lieutenant colonel who'd commanded respect from soldiers and civilians alike. He'd served in Vietnam, Panama, and the Persian Gulf, earning medals and commendations that now sat quietly in a box in his bedroom closet. After retiring from the military, he'd used his discipline and strategic thinking to build a successful construction company, specializing in military housing and government contracts. The business had prospered beyond his wildest dreams, allowing him to provide for his family in ways his own immigrant parents never could have imagined. But success hadn't changed Eduardo's fundamental nature. He remained humble, soft-spoken, and generous to a fault. When he'd sold his company 15 years earlier, he'd quietly donated millions to causes he believed in, particularly education and veteran services. The University of Texas had been one of his favorite recipients, receiving donations that had funded building construction, scholarship programs, and support services for student veterans. He'd never sought recognition for his gifts, preferring to let his money do the talking while he remained in the background. Today, however, he wasn't here as a donor or benefactor. He was here as a grandfather, proud beyond measure of his granddaughter's achievement and determined not to let anything prevent him from witnessing this milestone moment. Jennifer Martinez had always been special. Even as a little girl, she'd shown an aptitude for mathematics and science that reminded Eduardo of his own analytical mind. She'd excelled in school, earned a full scholarship to UT, and now was graduating with a master's degree in engineering. Eduardo had watched her grow from a curious child who asked endless questions about how things worked to a brilliant young woman who was already being recruited by major technology companies. She was everything he'd hoped education could produce: confident, capable, and ready to make her mark on the world. The graduation ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than an hour, and Eduardo knew he needed to find his seat soon. He'd received an invitation in the mail, a formal card embossed with the university seal, but somewhere between his truck and the campus entrance, he'd misplaced it. He wasn't worried about the invitation initially. After all, he was family, and surely the university would have records of who was supposed to attend. But as he approached the main entrance where security guards were checking credentials, he began to feel the first stirrings of concern. The security checkpoint was more elaborate than he'd expected. Guards in official uniforms were examining invitations, checking names against lists, and directing people toward different entrances based on their seating assignments. The process was efficient but thorough, designed to ensure that only authorized guests gained access to what was clearly a crowded and prestigious event. Eduardo joined the line of families waiting to be processed, watching as others presented their invitations and were quickly waved through. He continued to search through his pockets, hoping to find the missing invitation, but came up empty-handed each time. When his turn came, Eduardo approached the security guard with the polite deference of someone who'd spent a lifetime respecting authority. The guard was a young man, probably in his 20s, wearing a crisp uniform and carrying himself with the confidence of someone entrusted with maintaining order. "Good morning," Eduardo said softly, his slight accent coloring his words with the dignity of someone who'd learned English as a second language but spoke it with careful precision. "I'm here for the graduation ceremony." The guard looked him up and down, taking in his simple gray suit, his weathered hands, and his slightly confused expression. "I need to see your invitation, sir." Eduardo's search through his pockets became more frantic, his fingers checking and rechecking every fold and crease of his jacket and pants. "I had it this morning," he said, his voice apologetic. "I must have dropped it somewhere." The guard's expression shifted from professional courtesy to mild suspicion. He'd seen this before. People trying to gain access to exclusive events without proper authorization, using various excuses and sob stories to bypass security protocols. "Sir, I can't let you in without an invitation or some other form of authorization," the guard said, his tone becoming firmer. "This is a private ceremony for invited guests only." Behind Eduardo, the line of families was growing longer, and he could sense their impatience as the delay continued. Some people were checking their watches, others were whispering among themselves, and a few were clearly annoyed by the holdup. "I'm here for my granddaughter," Eduardo said, his voice growing smaller as he realized the gravity of his situation. "Jennifer Martinez. She's graduating with her master's degree today." The guard consulted his clipboard, running his finger down a long list of names. Eduardo waited hopefully, certain that Jennifer's name would be there and that somehow this would resolve the confusion. "I don't see a Jennifer Martinez on my list," the guard said after a moment. "Are you sure you have the right ceremony? There are multiple graduations happening today." Eduardo felt a wave of panic wash over him. He'd driven 2 hours to be here, had been looking forward to this day for months, and now he might miss his granddaughter's biggest moment because of a misplaced invitation and a bureaucratic misunderstanding. "Please," he said, his voice carrying a note of desperation he rarely allowed others to hear. "She's in the engineering program. Master's degree. I've been planning to be here for months." The guard's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "I'm sorry, sir, but without proper authorization, I can't let you through. You'll need to contact the registrar's office or find someone who can verify your invitation." Other families in line were beginning to voice their frustration more openly now. Comments about the delay, suggestions that Eduardo step aside, and general impatience filled the air around them. The pressure was mounting, and Eduardo could feel himself becoming the center of unwanted attention. A second security guard approached, alerted by the commotion and the growing line. This one was older, more experienced, with the bearing of someone who'd dealt with difficult situations before. "What's the problem here?" the second guard asked. "This gentleman claims he's here for the graduation, but he doesn't have an invitation and I can't find his granddaughter on my list," the first guard explained. The second guard looked Eduardo over with the same skeptical assessment, taking in his simple clothes, his nervous demeanor, and his obvious distress. To him, Eduardo looked like exactly what he appeared to be, an elderly man who was confused about where he belonged. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," the second guard said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're holding up the line, and we need to process authorized guests." Eduardo felt a crushing sense of defeat wash over him. He was about to miss his granddaughter's graduation because he couldn't prove he belonged there. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who'd given millions to this institution was being turned away at the gates because he looked like he didn't belong. As the guards prepared to escort him away from the entrance, Eduardo made one last desperate attempt to resolve the situation. "My name is Martinez," he said quietly, hoping that somehow his family name might carry weight with the university staff. Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Martinez, retired. The guards exchanged glances, but the name didn't seem to register with them. To their young ears, it was just another Hispanic surname, nothing that would distinguish this elderly man from hundreds of other family members trying to attend the ceremony. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to ask you to leave," the first guard said, reaching for Eduardo's arm to guide him away from the entrance. That's when Dr. Patricia Williams walked by. Dr. Williams was the dean of students, a position she'd held for 8 years and one that had made her intimately familiar with every aspect of university life. She was on her way to the ceremony herself, running slightly late after dealing with a last-minute crisis involving parking arrangements for VIP guests. She noticed the commotion at the security checkpoint from 50 yards away, her experienced eye immediately recognizing the signs of a situation that needed administrative attention. As she approached, she could see an elderly Hispanic man being questioned by 2 security guards while a line of frustrated families waited behind them. Dr. Williams had spent her career in higher education administration, and she developed an instinct for situations that required delicate handling. Something about this scene didn't sit right with her. The man's obvious distress, his dignified bearing despite his confusion, and the way he carried himself suggested this wasn't a typical gatecrasher situation. "What seems to be the problem here?" Dr. Williams asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to resolving conflicts and making quick decisions. The first guard turned to her with obvious relief. "Dr. Williams, this gentleman claims he's here for the graduation, but he doesn't have an invitation and we can't verify his granddaughter's attendance." Dr. Williams looked at Eduardo with the kind of attention that comes from years of working with people from all backgrounds and circumstances. She saw beyond his simple clothes and nervous demeanor to something else, a quiet dignity that spoke of a life lived with purpose and achievement. "What's your name, sir?" she asked gently. Eduardo straightened slightly, responding to the respect in her voice. "Martinez," he said. "Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Martinez, retired. I'm here to see my granddaughter Jennifer graduate." The name hit Dr. Williams like a physical shock. Martinez. She'd seen that name hundreds of times over the years, carved in stone on building facades, printed on scholarship documents, and listed on donor recognition plaques throughout the campus. The Martinez Engineering Building, where she'd attended countless faculty meetings. The Martinez Scholarship Fund, which had provided full rides to over 200 students. The Martinez Veterans Center, which offered counseling and support services to student veterans. The Martinez Library Wing, where thousands of students studied every day. All of these facilities and programs existed because of the generosity of one man, Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Martinez, a major donor whose contributions had transformed the university over the past 15 years. Dr. Williams felt her face go pale as the full realization hit her. This wasn't just any elderly man being turned away at the gates. This was one of the university's most significant benefactors, a man whose donations had literally built parts of the campus where they were standing. "Oh my God," she whispered, loud enough for the security guards to hear. "Mr. Martinez, I am so sorry. Please forgive this misunderstanding." The guards looked confused, unsure why the dean's demeanor had changed so dramatically. To them, Eduardo still looked like the same confused old man they'd been trying to turn away. Dr. Williams stepped forward and took Eduardo's arm gently, her touch conveying both respect and apology. "Mr. Martinez, you shouldn't be standing here in line with everyone else. You should be in the VIP section with the other honored guests." Eduardo looked confused by the sudden change in treatment. "I just want to see my granddaughter graduate," he said simply. I don't need any special treatment. Sir, with all due respect, you've earned special treatment, Dr. Williams said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Your generosity has transformed this university. Thousands of students have benefited from your donations. She turned to the security guards, who were now listening with growing awareness of their mistake. This is Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Martinez, one of our most distinguished donors. The engineering building where today's ceremony is being held, he funded its construction. The scholarship program that's putting dozens of students through school, he created it. The guards' expressions shifted from confusion to horror as they realized the magnitude of their error. They'd been about to escort away one of the university's most important supporters, a man whose contributions had made their own jobs possible. Mr. Martinez, I cannot apologize enough for this treatment, Dr. Williams continued. Please allow me to personally escort you to where you belong. Eduardo remained humble even in the face of this recognition. Thank you, but I really just want to find my seat and watch Jennifer graduate. She's worked so hard for this moment. Dr. Williams smiled, struck by his genuine humility despite his enormous contributions to the university. Jennifer Martinez is your granddaughter? She's one of our most outstanding engineering students. Her professors speak very highly of her work. As they walked together toward the VIP entrance, Dr. Williams continued to express her apologies and her admiration for Eduardo's contributions. She explained how his donations had not only funded buildings and programs, but had also inspired other donors to give, creating a culture of philanthropy that had elevated the entire institution. You know, she said as they approached the ceremony venue, we've tried for years to properly recognize your contributions. We'd love to name you as our Philanthropist of the Year or create a special ceremony in your honor. Eduardo shook his head with a gentle smile. I don't give money for recognition, he said. I give it because education changed my life, and I wanted to change other people's lives too. The VIP section was located at the front of the auditorium, with comfortable seating and an unobstructed view of the stage where the graduates would receive their diplomas. Dr. Williams personally escorted Eduardo to a front-row seat, ensuring he had everything he needed for the ceremony. As she prepared to leave him to attend to her other duties, Dr. Williams paused. Mr. Martinez, would you mind if I made a brief announcement about your presence here today? I think our graduates and their families should know that one of the university's greatest supporters is here to celebrate with them. Eduardo considered this for a moment, then nodded. If you think it would be appropriate, he said, but please keep it brief. This day is about the graduates, not about me. 20 minutes later, as the ceremony began, Dr. Williams took the podium to make her opening remarks. After welcoming the families and congratulating the graduates, she paused and looked directly at Eduardo in the front row. Before we begin conferring degrees, I want to acknowledge a very special guest who is with us today, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Martinez is here to watch his granddaughter Jennifer receive her master's degree in engineering. The audience applauded politely, not yet understanding the significance of the announcement. Dr. Williams continued, what many of you may not realize is that Colonel Martinez is one of this university's most generous benefactors. The building where we're gathered today exists because of his vision and generosity. The scholarship program that has helped hundreds of students afford their education exists because of his commitment to opportunity. The applause grew stronger as people began to understand who Eduardo was and what he'd done for their institution. Colonel Martinez represents the very best of what it means to give back, Dr. Williams said. He's a veteran who served his country with distinction, a successful businessman who built prosperity through hard work, and a philanthropist who has quietly transformed lives through education. She gestured toward Eduardo, who remained seated, clearly uncomfortable with the attention but accepting it graciously. Sir, on behalf of every student who has walked through the doors of the Martinez Engineering Building, every scholarship recipient who has been able to pursue their dreams because of the Martinez Scholarship Fund, and every veteran who has found support through the Martinez Veterans Center, thank you. The entire auditorium rose in a standing ovation, thousands of people recognizing the man who'd made their educational opportunities possible. Faculty members who'd taught in buildings he'd funded, students who'd received scholarships he'd endowed, and families who'd benefited from programs he'd supported all joined in acknowledging his contributions. Eduardo stood slowly, nodding to acknowledge the appreciation, but his eyes were focused on finding his granddaughter among the graduating students. Jennifer was easy to spot in her cap and gown, sitting with her fellow engineering graduates and beaming with pride at seeing her grandfather recognized for his generosity. As the applause died down and the ceremony continued, Eduardo settled back into his seat with a quiet satisfaction. He'd nearly missed this moment because security guards couldn't see past his simple appearance to understand who he really was. But now he was here, in the front row, ready to watch his granddaughter achieve something that represented the culmination of generations of hard work and sacrifice. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same university that had nearly turned him away at the gates was now honoring him in front of thousands. The buildings around them bore his name, the programs supporting students carried his legacy, and the very ceremony they were attending existed in part because of his vision. But none of that mattered as much as the moment when Jennifer Martinez walked across the stage, received her diploma, and looked directly at her grandfather in the front row. In that instant, all the money he'd donated, all the buildings he'd funded, and all the recognition he'd received seemed secondary to the pride he felt in his granddaughter's achievement. After the ceremony, as families gathered outside to take pictures and celebrate, Eduardo was surrounded by well-wishers. University administrators thanked him for his continued support. Faculty members introduced themselves and spoke about how his donations had impacted their work, and students approached to express their gratitude for the opportunities his scholarships had provided. Jennifer made her way through the crowd to reach her grandfather, still wearing her cap and gown, her face glowing with excitement and accomplishment. When she reached him, she threw her arms around him in a hug that conveyed years of love and appreciation. "Abuelo, I can't believe they almost didn't let you in," she said, having heard about the incident at the gate from other family members who'd arrived earlier. "Don't they know who you are?" Eduardo smiled and adjusted her cap, which had been knocked askew by their embrace. "They know now," he said simply. "But more importantly, I know who you are, the first person in our family to earn a master's degree, and someone who's going to make a real difference in the world." As they posed for pictures together, Eduardo reflected on the day's events. He'd started the morning as an elderly man fumbling for a lost invitation, nearly turned away from his granddaughter's graduation by security guards who couldn't see past his appearance. He'd ended it as a recognized benefactor, honored by thousands and celebrated for his contributions to education. But the real victory wasn't in the recognition or the applause. It was in Jennifer's achievement, in the knowledge that his investments in education had created opportunities not just for strangers, but for his own family. It was in the understanding that the buildings he'd funded and the programs he'd supported had created the very environment where his granddaughter could excel. Dr. Williams approached them as they finished taking pictures, still apologetic about the morning's incident, but also clearly moved by the day's events. "Colonel Martinez, I hope you'll forgive our security staff," she said. "They're young, and they didn't understand who you were or what you've done for this institution." Eduardo shook his head dismissively. "They were doing their job," he said. "Besides, it reminded me that the most important things aren't always visible on the surface." He looked at Jennifer, then back at Dr. Williams. "I don't give money so people will recognize me when I walk through the gates. I give it so young people like Jennifer can walk across stages like this one and build better lives for themselves and their families." As the afternoon wore on and the crowds began to disperse, Eduardo and Jennifer walked together across the campus he'd helped build. They passed the Martinez Engineering Building, where she'd spent countless hours studying and attending classes. They walked by the Martinez Veterans Center, where student veterans found support and community. They stopped at the Martinez Library Wing, where she'd written her thesis. "You built all of this, didn't you?" Jennifer asked, seeing the campus through new eyes. "I helped," Eduardo said modestly. "But the real builders are people like you, students who use these facilities to learn and grow and make the world better." As they reached Eduardo's truck in the visitor parking lot, Jennifer hugged her grandfather one more time. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for today, but for everything. For showing me that education matters, for supporting me through school, and for making all of this possible." Eduardo smiled and climbed into his truck, already looking forward to the drive back to San Antonio. He'd witnessed his granddaughter's graduation, been recognized for his contributions to the university, and reminded himself why he'd chosen to invest in education in the first place. As he drove away from the campus, Eduardo could see the buildings he'd funded in his rearview mirror, permanent fixtures that would serve students for generations to come. But more importantly, he carried with him the memory of Jennifer's face as she received her diploma, the culmination of a dream that had started with his own parents' belief in the transformative power of education. Sometimes the most important people don't look like they belong in the places where they've made the greatest impact. Sometimes a man in a simple gray suit carries more influence than those in expensive clothes and official titles. Sometimes the person fumbling for a lost invitation has already given more to an institution than anyone else in the room. Eduardo Martinez nearly missed his granddaughter's graduation because security guards couldn't see past his humble appearance to understand his significance. But in the end, his quiet dignity and genuine purpose shone through, earning him not just entry to the ceremony, but recognition for a lifetime of generosity that had transformed countless lives. He'd never sought the spotlight or demanded special treatment. He'd given millions of dollars without expecting anything in return, content to let his contributions speak for themselves while he remained in the background. But on this day, when it mattered most, his identity was revealed and his impact was acknowledged. The Martinez Engineering Building will stand for decades, educating future generations of engineers and innovators. The Martinez Scholarship Fund will continue providing opportunities for deserving students who might not otherwise afford college. The Martinez Veterans Center will keep supporting those who served their country and now seek to serve their communities through education. But perhaps Eduardo's greatest legacy walked across that stage in a cap and gown, carrying his name and his values into a future bright with possibility. Jennifer Martinez, master's degree recipient, granddaughter of a man who understood that the most powerful investment anyone can make is in the education of others. This story was brought to you by the Veteran Voices. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Maybe it was a teacher who inspired you to pursue your dreams, a mentor who opened doors you didn't know existed, or a family member who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities they never had. Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how you remember them. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're here to remind the world that extraordinary people are all around us, often in the most unexpected places, making a difference through quiet acts of generosity and love. We'll see you in the next one.